In 1985, the United States Army retired a weapon system that had anchored the infantry through 4 global conflicts. But the rigid chronology of this tool begins much earlier. October 1905, the island of Samar, Philippines. Antonio Caspi, a Pulahan rebel, lunged at his American guards. 3 rounds from a .38 caliber Colt revolver punched into his chest. Both lungs were perforated. A 4th bullet shattered his hand and lodged in his forearm. Why did bullets passing through both lungs fail to stop the momentum of a single man? Common ballistic logic suggested 4 direct hits would neutralize any human target. Reality dictated a different outcome. Caspi continued the assault. He only stopped when the steel butt plate of a Springfield carbine crushed his skull. 600 miles to the south, a distance equal to the entire length of Italy, the failure repeated. Moro warriors prepared for death through ritual purification. They bound their limbs with leather tourniquets to slow hemorrhaging. They charged American lines with blades. The .38 rounds passed through them without slowing the advance. The physics was undeniable. Under the international rules of war, military projectiles could not expand. A .38 bullet is 0.357 inches wide. A .45 is 0.451. The difference is less than a tenth of an inch. In the geometry of a gunfight, that tenth of an inch was the margin between a dead soldier and a dead rebel. General Wood's 1904 report was blunt. He documented that the .38 lacked the kinetic shock necessary for colonial warfare. The data from the Philippine Islands proved that only a .45 caliber projectile could stop a charging man in his tracks. The physiological failure of the old standard created an immediate institutional vacuum. The War Department formalized the technical requirement for a new .45 caliber service cartridge. The requirements established by General Leonard Wood shifted the search for a solution from the Philippine jungles to the industrial slaughterhouses of the American Midwest. In 1904, Colonel John Thompson and Major Louis Lagarde initiated a series of ballistic trials at the Union Stockyards in Chicago. The process was clinical. Technicians led live cattle and horses into the testing stalls. They positioned human cadavers on suspension rigs. 7 different calibers were fired at varying distances to measure stopping power. Thompson observed the impact on muscle tissue and bone. He recorded the seconds it took for a bovine heart to stop. The data yielded a singular conclusion. A military sidearm required a minimum caliber of .45 to ensure immediate physiological cessation at short range. The cartridge would define the gun. John Browning had refined semi-automatic designs for Colt since the late 1890s. He scaled his existing .38 architecture to meet the new ballistic mandate. 6 years of iterative engineering followed. By 1911, the competition narrowed to 2 candidates, Colt and Savage. The final trial was an industrial endurance test. Technicians loaded magazines for 2 days. When the barrels overheated, handlers plunged the pistols into buckets of water. The Savage pistol struggled, registering 37 malfunctions under the strain. Browning's Colt fired 6,000 rounds without a single stoppage. It was a mechanical anomaly. The design featured a distinctive metallic rattle. Engineers at the trials criticized the loose tolerances between the slide and the frame. They preferred the tight precision fit of a target pistol. Browning ignored them. He intentionally designed the mechanism with dirty clearances to accommodate mud, frozen rain, and congealed blood. He was not building a sporting tool. He was building a machine for conditions that did not yet exist in the American lexicon. The production cost was fixed at $14.25 per unit. This amounted to approximately 450 contemporary dollars. It was a price point that allowed for the mass mobilization of millions. Colonel Thompson, the man who had overseen the slaughterhouse tests, chaired the board that issued the final recommendation. On March 29, 1911, the War Department signed the official procurement contracts. The mechanical platform sanctioned by Colonel Thompson underwent its definitive operational validation on October 8, 1918, within the Argonne Forest. On that day, 8 American soldiers successfully apprehended 132 German prisoners in a single engagement. How did a conscript with an empty rifle technically stop a bayonet charge? Corporal Alvin York was a documented conscientious objector, a Christian from the Tennessee mountains. He viewed lethal force as a theological transgression and filed for exemption twice. The War Department denied both requests. York entered the combat zone under protest. He was eventually trapped in a ravine with the 7 survivors of a 17-man patrol. 6 Americans were dead, 3 were wounded. German Maxim fire echoed off the wet limestone of the ravines. The sound was constant. A German officer and 5 men launched a bayonet charge from a distance of 25 yards. York's Enfield rifle was empty. At this range, reloading was impossible. He drew his M1911. York applied a specific technical sequence derived from turkey hunting in Pall Mall. This logic dictates targeting the rear of a formation first. It prevents the leading elements from detecting the attrition and scattering. York engaged the last man in the file first and worked forward. 6 rounds, 6 targets neutralized. The German commander surrendered. Official citations omit the technical specifics of the handgun. The data survives through York's diary and the affidavit of Private Percy Beardsley. This engagement established a distinct tactical archetype. The pistol functioned as the final instrument when the primary plan was dead. The tactical precedent established in 1918 reached its absolute statistical limit on July 7, 1944. On the island of Saipan, the sidearm transitioned from a secondary tool into a terminal social contract. A force of 3,000 to 5,000 Japanese soldiers initiated the largest banzai charge of the Pacific War. The resulting density of fire created a lethal mechanical barrier. Evacuation of the wounded became mathematically impossible. Sergeant Thomas Baker sustained multiple debilitating injuries. He could not walk. He could not be carried. As the American line collapsed, his comrades propped him against a tree. The transfer of the weapon functioned as the only available act of parting. It signaled the transition from unit cohesion to total individual isolation. The squad retreated into the darkness. Baker remained. The sergeant faced the advancing mass with a mechanical certainty of doom. The weapon in his hand contained the entirety of his remaining agency. He possessed exactly 8 rounds. Those 8 rounds in Sergeant Baker's hand represented a microscopic fraction of the 1,880,000 pistols ordered for the global campaign. What was the statistical price of using this weapon in close combat? July 1944, Saipan. The American squad retreated. Baker refused evacuation to save his men. They found him later propped against a Philippine mahogany tree. His body remained in the final firing position. The pistol sat empty in his grip. 8 enemy soldiers lay dead in the dirt before him. The weapon weighed exactly 2.5 pounds loaded. It felt like a heavy hardcover book in the palm. Cold, dense, final. Baker was not an isolated case. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien faced the same end. He fired 2 Colts simultaneously until he was overrun at a machine gun position. Both men received the Medal of Honor posthumously. The medal citations reveal a grim mathematical pattern. 20 separate Medal of Honor actions involved the 1911. 12 of those 20 men were killed. Drawing the sidearm meant a 60% probability of death for the operator. The scale of production was total. Remington Rand produced 900,000 units. Before the war, the company manufactured typewriters. Their previous best-known product featured a backspace key. In 1943, they pivoted to a mechanism that offered no possibility of correction. By November 1943, the weapon's social role in the infantry was solidified. It was an instrument of the absolute limit. A Marine Raider Battalion report from New Georgia defined the tool's existence. The official document stated the weapon was held up very well but used very little. almost never needed, and remained completely reliable until it was the only thing left. The documented reliability of the weapon encountered critical thermal limits in November 1950. At the chosen reservoir, the temperature dropped to -35 degrees. Frozen steel burned bare skin on contact. Morphine syrettes turned to ice inside medical kits. Standard lubricants reached their freezing point and solidified, turning into a heavy adhesive. Bolt actions locked. Marines were forced to urinate on their weapons to thaw the metal components. Precision engineering became a liability. In clean rooms, tight tolerances signify quality. In the sub-zero mud of Korea, those same tolerances trapped ice and seized the cycle. The M1 carbine failed. Soldiers responded by stripping every drop of oil from their sidearms. They ran the pistols dry. The loose fit, often criticized by ordnance engineers for its rattle, allowed the mechanism to eject ice fragments without jamming. General S.L.A. Marshall documented a fundamental shift in infantry behavior during this period. His research noted more instances of the service pistol used with lethal effect in Korea than in all his World War II studies combined. The cause was tactical. Chinese forces specialized in night infiltration. They appeared suddenly inside American foxholes. At a distance of 3 feet, a rifle was an encumbrance. The pistol was the only mechanical response left. By June 1951, the weapon moved from the frozen reservoirs to the muddy hills. Private Jack Hansen of the 31st Infantry faced a breakthrough. His squad had 4 wounded men who could not retreat quickly. Hansen stayed behind to cover the withdrawal. He stayed on the gun through the night. When the counterattack retook the hill the following morning, they found the machine gun ammunition expended. 22 enemy bodies lay in front of the foxhole. Hansen was found with a machete in his left hand and his sidearm in his right. The slide remained locked in the rear position after the final round was fired. 15 years after the frozen trenches of Korea, the combat radius collapsed to the width of a man's shoulders in Vietnam. The battlefield moved into the earth. How many shots could a human nervous system endure inside a closed clay tube? 3. Beyond that, the operator reached a physiological threshold of total sensory failure. In 1966, Captain Herbert Thornton established the first formal tunnel-clearing detachments. Recruitment followed strict physical and psychological parameters. Candidates were under 5 feet 5 inches, slight frames, high resilience. They became a distinct social caste of the infantry, the tunnel rats. The flashlight beam probes the darkness. Hand-carved red clay walls press against the soldier's ribs. The air is a thick slurry of sweat, damp earth, and human waste. He grips an M1911. It is the only weapon that fits. Acoustic pressure from a .45 caliber discharge in a 3-foot tunnel caused immediate barotrauma to the eardrums. The muzzle flash produced temporary blindness. The physical cost of survival was high. The hammer strikes. A white-hot flash sears the retinas. The roar is not a sound, but a physical blow to the skull. The chemical smell of burnt powder mixes with the stench of dug-over red clay and sweat. The operator waited in the absolute dark, listening to the ringing in his ears. He had fired his 3-round limit. He knew the enemy was now moving toward the sound of his last shot. 19 years after the humid darkness of those tunnels, the era of the large caliber reached a systemic dead end. In 1985, the United States Army retired the M1911 after 74 years of continuous service. This transition covered the historical expanse from horse-drawn cavalry to the dawn of satellite navigation. NATO standardization protocols dictated the shift. High-capacity 9mm magazines replaced the heavy 7-round .45 caliber steel. Most frames in the inventory were 40 years old. The last new units had left the factory in 1945. Ballistic physics debunks the cinematic myth of the weapon. A .45 caliber round does not throw a man backward. Physics forbids it. If the impact possessed enough momentum to knock a target down, the recoil would strike the shooter with equal force. The secret was ballistic displacement. In a combat environment where military ball ammunition cannot expand, Diameter is the only variable that matters. The .45 caliber created a permanent wound channel 60% larger than a 9mm round. It was a mechanical solution to a physiological problem. The system refused to disappear. Marine Force recon operators spent decades hand-assembling pistols from salvaged World War II frames. In 2012, the Pentagon acknowledged this reality. Colt won a contract for 12,000 M45A1s. It was the first official procurement of the platform since the end of the Second World War. Special operations units carried them into combat until 2016. The final shift to the Glock 19 was a matter of logistics, not ballistic performance. The institutional data records a singular legacy: 2.7 million units produced, 55 Medal of Honor citations earned with the heavy steel in hand. It served the sergeant propped against a tree with 8 rounds remaining, and the pacifist in the Argonne forest. It was the last resort for the private in a frozen foxhole and the volunteer in a clay tunnel. The M1911 was never designed to win a campaign or move a front line. Its only purpose was to provide a dying man with exactly 10